So as we begin the build process, obviously step number one is to get ourselves organized and make room for everything. So the first thing I decided to do before really getting into the workbench was I wanted to build a pair of sawhorses to help facilitate the actual building of the workbench. So the first thing we're doing here is building a pair of sawhorses. Pretty simple design. It's just 7 2x4 pieces at 32 inches each. 4 for the legs and 3 pieces to form basically an I-beam for the main structure across the middle. So we're just cutting 32-inch pieces of 2x4, and then we will build up the first sawhorse. Putting the center section together first, just in a simple I-beam configuration. And then we'll pre-drill the legs and screw them in at just using the angle made from the 2 horizontal pieces. Just put them at a convenient angle, as you'll see in just a second. There it goes. It's actually right about here that I get a delivery from Amazon. You can see the new box in the bottom right corner now of a circular saw. The other guy was actually kind of funny when he walked up carrying what is obviously a bright yellow DeWalt circular saw box, and I'm out here cutting wood, so that was kind of amusing. So I'll go ahead and take a break and get it set up. Figure I'll make things a little bit easier moving forward. And now we continue on making the second sawhorse, utilizing the first one to help hold things. Gotta make some practice cuts with the saw first, make sure I get the spacing right. And so I do use the circular saw some, but I switch back and forth and use the hand saw some still as well, just depending on the size of the piece and the size of the offcut left and stability and that kind of stuff, whichever one felt the best. So you'll see me switch back and forth and use both. So we're just going through cutting the 7 pieces for the second sawhorse, and then we'll assemble them in exactly the same way as we did the first. So these are pretty basic design. They are designed to stack on top of each other as I do here as I move them. And a little victory stand on them for. So now this is part 2 after lunch. We actually begin work on the workbench proper. So the first thing I have there is some fir, Douglas fir 4x4s. Using those posts for the legs. Ultimately, I'm planning for my workbench to be about 36 inches high. So given the double plywood layer I have planned for the actual surface, I'm making my legs 34 inches tall. So now we're putting the corner flanges test fit on the posts. And so now I've got to calculate the length of the stretchers to fit with the final planned dimensions of the whole workbench. So we're cutting the short stretchers first. We'll test fit with the plywood. Test fit actually, the little test measure there came in handy because whenever I went to hold it up, it was actually off. I had messed up one of my calculations earlier and I was off by an inch. Fortunately, I was just an inch long, and so I was able to cut off another inch here and shorten the stretcher up, and then we're able to go on about our business. Moving on to the long stretchers. And so once we were done with all our cutting, we're able to use the sawhorses to make a little makeshift workbench so that we can build the actual workbench. So here I'm measuring and marking the height of the flanges in order to get the top where it wanted and the shelf where I want it. And then I just put a couple screws in to hold everything in place so we could have a final test fit. Final double check for square, and then we start securing the stretchers to the flange. All right, and this is day 2 of the build. So we left off yesterday with putting the stretchers on the frame, and I actually ended up running out of the screws I was using in the flange, and so I had to go get another box. And so now we're just finishing out filling in all the holes with the screws. It's a bunch. There's something like 176 screws in these flanges. It just felt like I was kept putting screws and screws and screws and screws in. But finally we get all the holes filled and we're able to move on with our project. So now we're going to add some cross stretchers on the inside to support the shelf and work surface to keep it from bouncing and or bowing under pressure. So I'm just fitting 3 interior cross stretchers on the top and the bottom shelf. And now we can move to putting on the top. We'll sandpaper to knock down any edges from the screws. Ah, yes, this piece. This is gonna be a backstop, but I haven't quite figured out exactly what I want to do with it, so there's a little bit of futzing around with it here before I finally make up my mind about what I want to actually have that be when I get done. So we cut it down to size, but as we'll see later, I changed my mind about how big I want it to be, and so we change it yet again. So now we move on to fitting up the top. So we just glued it and then screwed it to the 2x4 stretchers only. I made sure to not put anything on the 4x4 posts because the top is going to be considered sacrificial, and so I could conceivably take the top 2x4 and stretchers off and replace it if I ever need to in the future. So then just a second sheet of plywood, again glued and screwed to the first to finish the top. And now we're on day 3. And if you'll notice, there's now magically a shelf in the bottom. That was actually kind of a pain to put in because of the way the posts come into the interior, or the bottom stretchers are flush with the outside, and I notched the corners of the stretchers, notched the corner of the plywood. It didn't actually fit in even diagonally, so I had to actually rip it down the middle into 2 pieces and then put it in and screw it down side by side. Kind of a pain. Should have thought about doing that a little differently from the beginning, but hindsight and all that. So now we're actually putting on some caster wheels. Just putting them to the inside of the legs so that they don't stick out and out to the outside and potentially trip anyone or affect the overall footprint of the workbench. Workbench will end up being up against the wall for most of the time, but I could potentially see wanting to pull it out just to cut down on mess and that kind of stuff if I'm cutting wood. So I decided to go ahead and add the casters. And we're back to the backstop again. Here we are, finally making up our mind about what we want to do with it, and so we're cutting it down to final size. And this will be the last piece to the puzzle.
All right, here we go. Final product. My super simple, really not fancy or sexy looking workbench. But hey, it is, in fact, all mine. And not only is it all mine, but I built it. So hey, I got that going for me. So yeah, we got 2 foot by 6 foot top. I got about a 2x4's worth of backstop sticking up. As you can see, it does not cover over the flanges on the back, so if for some reason I ever decide to completely rebuild this, it's not overlapping the metal flanges on the legs. Scrap wood storage shelf on the bottom. I'll probably end up standing the sheet goods that I get against the wall behind it when it's going to go against that wall over there. And then the fun part is the wheels. So let's make sure these work. Set you there. Those are down. Ta-da! And this was not exactly a light workbench either. I mean, I don't know. I don't guess you could really see me try and flip this thing around, but it is absolutely easy to move right now. And when you're done, you just let the wheels back up, the legs come down, and we're back on our own weight. Ah, I'm so happy. Whew. So yeah, that's the thing.